Hey there, I'm Bailey and welcome to my channel where we discuss all the tips and tricks necessary for you to live a life of adventure. Today I'm out here on some of our local snowshoe trails. You can see that it is definitely winter in Alaska, so I just wanted to take that opportunity to talk to you guys about winter paw care for your dogs. This is a question I see asked all the time is, does my dog need to wear booties? What wax, or should my dogs wear paw wax in the winter? How do I know if my dog's feet are too cold? So these are all kind of questions we're going to look at today. So first we're going to talk about why your dog can walk in the snow without gear sometimes, right? Depending on the dog. How to tell if your dog's paws are too cold, and then if they are too cold, what things can you do to kind of help make sure your dog is more comfortable so you can continue enjoying spending time outside. So before I get into all that though, if you want to see more tips and tricks all about hiking and backpacking with your dogs, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I post new videos every week. And also a thumbs up would let me know that I should continue to make videos just like this. Okay, so before we can really jump in and talk about what you should do about your dog's paw pads, first I kind of wanted to mention and go through how dogs are able to walk outside in the cold at all, because it's pretty unique, right? Like if we tried to walk around in the snow like this barefoot, you probably wouldn't last very long, even if you worked hard to try to like build up to it. So dogs do have some pretty cool adaptations. And so, I'm sorry, I'm going to get like super science nerdy for a second here. So the first one is that all dogs, especially your northern breeds, have arteries and veins that run really close together in their paws. So the reason why they do this is because that means when the blood is coming down from their heart, it's warmer, right? And then when it gets to the paws, it cools down, so it's colder. So the warm blood coming down warms up the cold blood before it gets back to the body. And this really helps with like temperature maintenance. And this like opposite is true too. The warm blood that's coming down gets cooled down before it gets to the foot pad. So that way they're like wasting a lot less heat and a lot less energy trying to maintain their body temperature. This means that dogs' feet, when they're out hiking in the cold, really are staying at a temperature that's pretty close to freezing. So the second one is that a dog's paw pad, like the actual pad itself, really is just like a giant fat pad. And so as you probably know, fat is pretty insulating. That's why like blubber on whales and seals and stuff, why they have it. So that like fat pad helps to kind of protect the dog's foot and insulate it from the snow and from the ground in general. So I do want to point out that there are some variations within like breeds and also within size. So there's a reason why like your northern breeds, so like your Huskies, your Malamutes, your Samoyeds, tend to do better in the snow, and that's because these characteristics are like more obvious and more pronounced than they are in dogs that don't need them. So dogs that live in warm areas. So those dogs tend to do better and will have less problems in the snow. Same thing with like big dogs versus small dogs. So if you've ever heard about thermoregulation between elephants and mice, how mice burn more calories than elephants do and have a faster metabolism, they have a bigger surface area to volume ratio. The same would be true with small dogs versus big dogs, right? So I've noticed that Skittles gets cold in the snow a lot faster, especially her feet, and I think it's just because she's losing more of that heat a lot faster just because she has more surface area compared to the volume inside her body. All right, and then the last thing before we really move on is I do want to say that dogs can get frostbite even on their feet. So even though they're well adapted and have these abilities that people don't have to be able to sustain themselves in the snow, if it does get super cold, especially for dogs that aren't originally from northern climates, then they can get frostbite just like people. So be sure to keep that in mind. You know, you want to make sure to keep your dog safe. Now, how can you tell if your dog is feeling really cold to make sure that they don't get something like frostbite? There's a couple really good indicators that you can look for. The first one would be if they're holding their paw up all the time. That just kind of tells you that their feet are probably a little bit cold. If you just notice them doing it a little bit, it's probably not a big deal, especially if you keep moving. But if you keep taking lots of breaks and their dog is really like not wanting to stand on the cold ground, that's usually a pretty good indicator that their feet are getting cold. Another thing that I've noticed a lot, especially with like Prima, is that if she is cold, especially her feet, then they will like lay on the ground and curl their feet under them to try to keep them off the ground. So that's another thing I've noticed. You know, if you have smaller dogs, you might notice that they're trying to jump on you to get you to pick them up. That's usually a pretty good indicator that they're not comfortable on the ground anymore and are pretty cold. And of course, like shivering, other signs of just being cold in general is a good idea that you should probably think about heading inside or doing some precautions to make sure that they're more comfortable outside. Okay, so let's jump into some tips on how you can keep your dog's feet more comfortable if you have noticed some of these signs that they're a little bit chilly, but you want to keep skiing, snowshoeing, whatever. So my first thing I want to say before we get into my kind of 3 main fixes are that, for one, this is assuming that your dog's nails are trimmed properly and that they're healthy enough to spend time outside. A lot of these work better if their nails are trimmed short, that way they're not splaying, those kinds of things. And then the second thing is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, if they're not acting cold, they're not holding up their feet, you really don't need to worry about using these kinds of methods, because it's just not necessary. You know, they're doing just fine. They're well adapted to the cold. My dogs are overeating moose poop right now and they don't care. So I'm not going to put anything on their feet like paw wax. So the first kind of thing that you can do if you've noticed that your dog's feet are cold is use a paw wax. So the premise of paw wax and how it works is it's like a salve that you put on your dog's pads, and it basically repels snow. So it keeps snow from clumping up and sticking to your dog's feet. And by preventing the snow from sticking to your dog's feet, it just makes sure that, you know, that cold is not constantly in contact with their foot, cooling them down, making their paw cold. The other benefit to using a paw wax is that in the winter, when it's really dry, it kind of keeps your dog's foot from cracking because it locks in that moisture. So I know of people that use paw wax, you know, kind of religiously in the winter, kind of like if you've ever noticed that some people that work outside or have like manual labor jobs, that their hands tend to get very cracked in the winter just because it's so dry. The same thing happens, so they just put it on all the time to prevent that from happening. The third one I'm going to talk about at the end, and that's to kind of keep salt off your dog's feet if you're walking on roads. So there's a couple different really great reasons to put it on your dog's feet. Obviously, mushers use it. There's one brand that is pretty well known called Musher's Secret, so you can order this online. I have lots of tubs floating around. You can put it on in summer, winter, fall, anytime, but a lot of people mostly use it for winter. Do make sure to buy something that is dog friendly, because a lot of them will try to lick it off, and you know, you want something that's going to work for the winter and not make their paws like too soft. You know, this keeps them moisturized, but the nice thing about like Musher's Secret and stuff is that it doesn't make them soft and then more likely to get injured from like rocks and stuff. Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about is if you have tried Musher's Secret and they're still getting a lot of snowballs on their feet, another thing that you can try is to clip the hair between their toes. So I haven't had a big issue with Cream with this, but this has happened to Skittles a couple times, where when they're walking along, especially when it's like really powdery snow, I've noticed, or like deep snow, sometimes the hair in between their paw pads will cause the snowballs or like the snow to kind of clump and get stuck in snowballs in between their toes, and that can make them pretty cold. So a quick easy fix you can do for this is to just take some like baby clippers and basically clipper out the hair that's in between their toes so the snow stops getting stuck in there. Another thing you can do is just take scissors. You don't need to have clippers for this. The biggest thing, of course, is just to be careful, right? So if your dog really doesn't like their feet being touched and messed with, of course, you know, you don't want to fight with them with a sharp object in your hand. So you could always take your dog to the groomer or even maybe your vet and have them just clipper the hair. I personally would not do this unless you're really having a big problem, just because I think that the hair kind of helps protect their feet, especially in the summer from like rocks and stuff. So only do that if they're having a hard time with having snowballs getting stuck. Okay, so your last kind of option that you have when it comes to taking care of your dog's feet while out for a winter hike would be to use Booties. Now, Booties are usually my last choice for a variety of reasons. The first one is because it can be hard to find a bootie that works and fits well. The second reason is because if you use them a lot, especially in summer, you can actually have some problems, especially with dogs that have dew claws. So I kind of try to keep this as a last resort. However, the good news is that most dogs actually adjust really well to wearing Booties. Usually what I do is I just put them on right before we're going to start hiking, and then even though the dogs like pick up their feet a lot at first, once they realize that we're just going to keep walking, then they seem to get over it because they completely forget about the Booties because they're so excited to go sniff and play in the snow. The other downside to Booties in the winter is that I have had a lot of problems with Booties falling off. Not as much as I thought I would, but I have lost a couple in the woods during the summer, and so I've always kind of worried about, you know, in deep snow, them falling off, never to be seen again. The good news is a lot of Booties come in pretty bright colors, so they're usually fairly easy to see in all this white. But that is something to keep in mind, is just kind of frequently check in on your dog to make sure they don't lose them. So why do booties work for winter hiking? The reason goes back to thinking about how their feet work. So essentially, like by putting a bootie on your dog's foot, you're just adding like an extra layer of insulation, the same as if you wear a shoe or gloves when you go hiking, just to help kind of give them an extra layer between their paw pads and the snow. So you do have a couple options when it comes to what kind of booties to put on your dog in the winter. There's plenty of different brands and products out there, and I really encourage you to try some different ones out to see what works best for your dog. I do think that there's 3 kind of main types. So the first kind of type you'll see, especially online, are these like dog mushing booties. So the nice thing for me, since I live in Alaska, you know, I can just find these at local pet stores pretty easily. If you live in the lower 48 though, and they don't sell these at any stores near you, you can just order them online. So you notice that they're basically just a fabric like sock, you know, just sewn together, super simple, with some Velcro at the top. You stick on your dog's foot, put it around, and it just kind of helps keep some snowballs out of your dog's feet, and they seem to work pretty well. The second kind that you'll see a lot are booties that have like a rubber bottom. So obviously these have a bit more insulation, and this is what I use for Skittles in the winter for that reason. They can be a bit harder to size is what I found, and more likely to fall off, and they're also a lot more expensive, so that's the other downside. But you know, it's kind of nice because they're Gore-Tex and there's just, like I said, a bit more insulation there as far as in the winter. And then the third kind you'll see is, I don't have an example of this one, I'm sorry, is like kind of an in-between, like they kind of have a little rubber on the bottom, but they're the ones that you usually see at like any sort of little pet store or fun store in any town across the US, where they are kind of like more fabricy on top and kind of like fake rubber, a little grippy on the bottom. Or maybe more like muttlocks. Muttlocks are a little bit nicer, but that's another option too. So any of those really works. Just give it a try, see what your dog's like, and then go from there. So let's talk about ice melt real quick. So it really isn't that common on trails, of course. As far as I know, maybe it's different where you live. However, you can run across ice melt in parking lots and trailhead where you're parking. So it is important to make sure to clean your dog's feet, because a lot of dogs, you know, lick their paws and then can ingest that, and ice melt really is pretty much never dog friendly. So what you can do about that is either just keep a washcloth or some baby wipes in your car. When you get home, you know, just bring your dogs in and wipe their feet off with a paper towel. Or the third option is you can keep some sort of like little bowl by the door and just dip their feet in the bowl and then dry them off when you get home. So that's a great way just to make sure to clean that stuff off. Okay, so that really is all I have for today. So the main thing is just to make sure your dog isn't holding up their feet a lot, and then if they are, you know, check for snowballs in their feet, maybe apply some Mushroom Secret, maybe trim their hair, and if none of those are working or the problem, then try to put some booties on your dog. You know, we all love spending time outside in the winter, and if we didn't, we'd go crazy, especially someplace like Alaska, where it is winter with snow on the ground for months on end. So the dogs really appreciate getting out, and I hope this has helped you out. So question of the day, let me know where you winter hike. Do you travel somewhere to hike in the winter, or do you live somewhere like Minnesota or the Northeast or something? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. And otherwise, that's all I have for today. I hope you guys have happy trails, and see you all next week.